You were in our green room getting ready to come on, and
Yes.
The White House now tells us that we can reveal that you just got off the phone with President Obama.
Yes, I did.
The stakes have been raised pretty high, but what did he say to you?
He, he encouraged me and supported me and thanked me for speaking out about the concerns of American women. And what was really personal for me was that he said to tell my parents that they should be proud, and that meant a lot because Rush Limbaugh questioned whether or not my family would be proud of me. So I just appreciated that very much.
Yet again, today on Andrea Mitchell's show, the biggest story in politics broke right here on MSNBC. The woman speaking with Andrea there, as you probably know, was Sandra Fluke. She's a Georgetown University law student. She's the one who sparked the "Where Are the Women" controversy in Congress last month. The Republicans in the House, Darrell Iss's committee in the House, called this panel of witnesses to testify on the issue of contraception being covered by health insurance. When the Democrats realized that the Republicans were not calling any women in their initial panel of witnesses at a contraception hearing, they asked that Sandra Fluke be called as their Democratic witness to testify about getting insurance through a Catholic institution that would not cover birth control and how it had cost a friend of hers one of her ovaries. The friend apparently needed contraception, not for birth control purposes, but for therapeutic purposes. Hormonal birth control has a lot of therapeutic purposes other than just preventing getting pregnant. But because Ms. Fluke's friend had to navigate around Georgetown University's objections to her prescription, it ended up being too late for her, and she suffered serious health consequences. She lost an ovary. That was going to be Sandra Fluke's testimony about the importance of health insurance covering contraception. The Republican committee chairman, Darrell Issa, said that Sandra Fluke was not qualified to testify on the issue of contraception coverage, but he said these guys were. Some Democrats walked out of that hearing that day. House Democrats under Nancy Pelosi later convened not technically a hearing because Democrats are in the minority, so they can't convene hearings. But the Democrats convened a forum in which they heard that testimony from Sandra Fluke, the testimony that Darrell Issa would not allow. Republicans wouldn't allow it at the official hearing, but Democrats took it at their forum. Now, the reason the president ended up calling Sandra Fluke today while she was waiting to go on Andrea Mitchell's show is because a conservative talk radio host named Rush Limbaugh, who's very influential on the right, has been making the case on his show for the Republicans' position against contraception coverage. And he's been making that case by personally attacking Ms. Fluke. And it's not like Mr. Limbaugh slipped up and accidentally said something offensive and maybe he'll apologize for it because he didn't mean it. He has been doing this for 3 straight days now. This was day 1.
A Georgetown University co-ed told Representative Nancy Pelosi's hearing that the women in her law school program are having so much sex they are going broke. Apparently, 4 out of every 10 co-eds are having so much sex that it's hard to make ends meet if they have to pay for their own contraception, said Sandra Fluke's research. Can you imagine if you're her parents, how proud of Sandra Fluke you would be? Your daughter goes up to a congressional hearing conducted by the Botox-filled Nancy Pelosi and testifies she's having so much sex she can't afford her own birth control pills. What does it say about the college co-ed Susan Fluke, who goes before a congressional committee and essentially says that she must be paid to have sex? What does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute.
That was day 1. The word that we cut off there was prostitute. He was calling her a hooker. That was day 1 for Mr. Limbaugh. So it wasn't like a slip of the tongue, right? This was day 2.
Ms. Fluke, have you ever heard of not having sex? Have you ever heard of not having sex so often? Ms. Fluke, and the rest of you feminazis, here's the deal. If we are going to pay for your contraceptives and thus pay for you to have sex, we want something for it. And I'll tell you what it is. We want you to post the videos online so we can all watch.
Today, Mr. Limbaugh was still going for it. That was day 2. Today, he's still going for it. Here's a sampling of what he had to say today.
It's no different than if somebody knocked on my door. that I don't know and say, you know what, I'm out of money. I can't afford birth control pills, and I'm supposed to have sex with 3 guys tonight.
Okay, so after those remarks and after Democrats bringing attention to them by saying they wanted Republicans to denounce these remarks or at least distance themselves from them, President Obama today called Sandra Fluke to buoy her against these kinds of attacks, which after all started because she wanted to testify on a public policy issue in Congress. And the president said specifically that her parents ought to be proud of her, which was, she said, was a nice thing in particular, given that the way Mr. Limbaugh had attacked her. And that was the biggest political news story of the day. The president weighing in on this situation and thereby implicitly putting Republicans on the spot to go ahead and say whether or not they believe it is attitudes like Mr. Limbaugh's about women and about sex and about birth control that are driving the Republican policy position that he supports, that are driving the anti-contraception effort that's going on in Republican Party politics right now. And while I think that is legitimately big political news, the president weighing in here, here's the thing about the talk radio part of this. I know a little bit about this from having been a talk radio host for years, but it doesn't take any expert knowledge here to know how this works. People like the talk radio host in question here, Mr. Limbaugh, are banking, literally banking. It is how they make their money. They're banking on you being offended by what they say. Mr. Limbaugh is trying to be provocative. He is trying to be offensive. He is trying to outrage you. He is trying to get you to talk about him, even if you don't listen to his radio show. He really wants to be very, very famous, even if it is for being a bad guy. This is what his radio show is for. This is what he does. He calls the First Lady, Michelle Obama, uppity. He calls combat veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan phony soldiers if they disagree with him on those wars. He made fun of Michael J. Fox's Parkinson's disease and said that Michael J. Fox was faking the effects of that disease for effect. A person does not say stuff like this and act like this accidentally. You don't stumble into positions like that, right? It was because Mr. Limbaugh did not get enough attention for calling this Georgetown law student a prostitute and a slut that he went back the next day and tried to get some more attention by saying anybody who wants insurance coverage for contraception ought to be forced to put their sex tapes online so he can enjoy them. A person says a thing like that to provoke outrage. And it works. Outrage is provoked. Mr. Limbaugh's remarks have been denounced by everybody from the president of Georgetown University to the co-chair of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee to his own advertisers. The blog Think Progress has been tracking reaction to Mr. Limbaugh's remarks from his advertisers. At last count, 4 companies had decided to pull their advertising from Mr. Limbaugh's radio show. Another 4 had said they would look into the matter. And listen, when you shock people for a living, when that's your business plan, you are playing with fire a little bit. You can go too far. People do lose their shows. There's a reason why Glenn Beck is only on the internet now, right? And so maybe losing all these advertisers and being this over the top will be it for Rush Limbaugh. Maybe he's actually gone too far this time, and maybe he'll even apologize, but probably not. This is what he does for a living. He has done this for decades. And here's what I think might actually be the more important point here. The specific way in which Rush Limbaugh is being offensive on purpose to make everybody outraged exposes a big, underappreciated, and sort of embarrassing fact at the center of all of the politics on this issue, which is that I don't think he knows what birth control is. I mean, I'm going to play one little part of it again. Try to listen to what he's saying here, not just for what's offensive about it, but listen to the argumentative point he is making. Listen to what he is trying to convince his listeners of when he says this. Listen.
Ms. Fluke, have you ever heard of not having sex? Have you ever heard of not having sex so often? The women in her law school program are having so much sex they are going broke buying birth control pills. She's having so much sex. She can't afford her own birth control pills, apparently. 4 out of every 10 co-eds are having so much sex that it's hard to make ends meet if they have to pay for their own contraception.
If you can put aside the fact here that Mr. Limbaugh is being mean, right? Remember that sometimes people are being mean because the fact that they don't understand something makes them angry, and it makes them act belligerently about it. I think Rush Limbaugh doesn't know what birth control is. I think he doesn't understand what he's talking about. I don't think he understands how contraception works. I think that Rush Limbaugh thinks you take a birth control pill to avoid getting pregnant each time you have sex. So the more times you have sex, the more birth control pills you need. I mean, we're talking about birth control that is prescribed. That's the whole point here. Prescription medication. That's why it would need to be covered by your health insurance. But you don't get a new IUD every time you're going to have sex. You don't have to go buy an individual birth control pill to cover each sexual incident which might result in you becoming pregnant. You just take one pill every day. It's a prescription deal, right? You take a birth control pill every day, even if you're not going to have sex at all that day, or even if you're going to have sex 1,000 times that day. You just need the one pill for that day. You don't need more birth control to keep you not pregnant for more sex.
Have you ever heard of not having sex so often?
It doesn't matter how often you have sex. That does not increase the number of birth control pills you have to take. And so, yes, Rush Limbaugh is acting like a jerk to make us all mad. Everybody's mad, as we should be, right? But more importantly, in showing his ignorance, he is helping us get back to the real problem of this debate, generally. The heart of this issue is the fact that you're bad at this, Rush Limbaugh. You don't even understand how babies are made, let alone how people can have sex without making a baby. And you would like the government to take over decision-making on these issues on your say-so. And you don't get it. You biologically don't get it. You just don't understand it. You were absent that day. In your radio studio or on Capitol Hill or on the campaign trail or in the state legislatures, these guys are saying, we know best. Government should be making these decisions about women's health. We've got it all figured out. And frankly, this is not a talk radio problem. This is also Mitt Romney's problem on this issue. Mitt Romney told Mike Huckabee that he would absolutely support a constitutional amendment that would define a fertilized egg as a person. A personhood thing, right? Even before Mississippi voted that down, Mitt Romney said he would have supported that at the state level when he was governor of Massachusetts. Mississippi said no to personhood because the personhood amendment wouldn't just ban all abortion. A personhood amendment would probably ban hormonal contraception as well. And Mitt Romney says he is all for contraception, but he would support personhood.
You were on Governor Huckabee's show a few weeks ago, and one of the things that you folks talked about was that you would support a Life Begins at Conception amendment. Now, that would essentially mean banning most forms of birth control. 98% of American women, including me, use birth control. So could you help me understand why you oppose the use of birth control?
I don't. I'm sorry, life begins at conception. Birth control prevents conception.
What she's asking Mitt Romney is the right question. And he has no idea what she is talking about. You can see he looks puzzled and he kind of makes the joke and looks around. Is there something I'm not getting here? Yes, there's something you're not getting here. Mitt Romney does not understand how contraception works. This is how the birth control pill works. It's how the IUD works. It's how the morning after pill works. This is how that ring thing your girlfriend told you about that you didn't totally understand. This is how that works. This is how birth control that is used by the vast majority of American women works. This is how hormonal birth control works. This is how the birth control works that Mitt Romney told Mike Huckabee he would like to make illegal when he said he supports a Life Begins at Conception constitutional amendment. That's what we tried to explain with the man cave diagram, right? Way back in the day. Mitt Romney doesn't understand what contraception is, and he is running for president. Rush Limbaugh also does not understand what contraception is, and he, right now, is reveling in the nation being so outraged about all the offensive things he said about it in the last few days. And President Obama, he made national news today by calling the woman Rush Limbaugh has been calling a slut and a prostitute and attacking on his radio show. The president making news by calling that woman before she went on Andrea Mitchell's show today, thereby weighing into this dispute. Now, does President Obama understand what contraception is and how it works? I don't know. I kind of assume that he does. But the point is that there is a difference between the two parties on this issue right now. And it maybe doesn't matter if he gets it, because he's not, and the Democrats aren't, playing doctor on this issue. They are not saying that the government should be the ones who make the decisions about contraception and how your lady parts work. You should make that decision with your doctor privately. Government doesn't have a role there. And so, yes, Rush Limbaugh is a jerk. But more importantly, Rush Limbaugh is a dummy. And if you want government making decisions on childbirth and abortion and fertility and contraception, you being a dummy is a way bigger problem than you being a jerk.